Thank you and good afternoon. It's exactly 4 o'clock and I wanted to start on time. Unfortunately, Secretary Lopez it is just a bit delayed, so I thought that I would just deliver a brief welcome remarks, and then so that when they arrive, she can immediately introduce our guest of honor. In fact, if they were here, I wouldn't read my 10-page speech and I would want to go directly to him. So in short, what I'm trying to say, if you have to bear with me as a time killer, I'm killing time so that you're not bored waiting for them. But thank you, Secretary Jokno. We came from a budget meeting with the Office of the Executive Secretary. We're working here to learn about GNH. And I'm sure he will say we don't need to preach to him because we're preaching to the converted. So thank you for being here. Secretary Sitoy, former mayor, I am sure that somehow you've incorporated the elements of GNH in your municipality in Cebu. And Secretary Salalima of the ICT, you could help us how to measure and how to operationalize GNH through your knowledge of communications and technology. Secretary Lau of the National Commission on Muslim Filipinos is also here, and all our friends from the DNR, from the various agencies of government, from the private sector, thank you. The media are covering this, I think Philippine Star and through Julie Alegre and Kathy Yamsuan of Inquirer. So let me just allow me, I think I have a PowerPoint. Do I have a PowerPoint? Yes. Okay. Sorry. We can move this. Yes, use of that. Thank you. Thank you. That's a good idea. So just bear with me. I just have to read a few pages of this prepared speech. The Philippines is a country blessed with so many scenic islands, as you very well know, that captivate locals and foreigners alike. And even in the patches of green here in our city, one is compelled to literally stop and smell the flowers. But in the global race to become the biggest, the fastest, and the best, there is no room for leisurely strolls sometimes. In fact, one study revealed that people in the wealthiest and most economically productive cities tend to walk the fastest. We are actually all about economic progress and global competitiveness, and we collectively rush on. This is perhaps why there is little interest in my suggestion for the country to measure gross national happiness, along with more common economic indicators like gross domestic product. In fact, I will get a copy of my resolution. Long before Dr. Chetri had planned his trip to the Philippines, and in fact, it is my nth time to file this Senate resolution urging the NEDA to update our development indicators to reflect the happiness concept or index. So I was so happy when Secretary Gina had mentioned to me that he was coming for 10 days and she would like the Senate of the Philippines to host a meeting. Originally, it would have been in the Senate, but perhaps it would be more difficult for you guys to cross to the other side of town, so I thought I'd have it in this little room with some trees around it. I wish there was no aircon and just fresh air, but that's fine. So I thought that I was alone in government wanting to espouse GNH until I talked to Sec Jokno, I talked to other people in government, and Gina came up with the idea of having this joint brief lecture on GNH. So even prior to my appointment as a UN Global Champion for Resilience, even as Regional Asia-Pacific Champion for Disaster Risk Reduction, we've tried to incorporate GNH in our budgetary process through the General Appropriations Act and through legislation. But the first meeting I had in 2009, where the UNISDR had asked us to look at the concept of GNH was in 2009, where I addressed the Bhutan National Sensitization Workshop on Disaster Risk Reduction. As you know, Bhutan, of less than 1 million people, is considered, like the Philippines, one of the most vulnerable nations in the world. And I quickly realized that their idea of GNH actually has a place in a high-speed world. From then on, I've been urging the Philippine government to adopt the GNH concept of Bhutan. But true enough, it's difficult to actually measure this. Secretary Doctor was earlier asking me, pero how do we, conceptually it's good, but how do you measure GNH? It's actually not easy, and we will learn from Dr. Chetri today. The thought behind GNH is simple. Incorporate the status of the environment, good governance, equitable and sustainable socio-economic growth, and the promotion and preservation of culture when measuring the growth of countries. The quality of life is just as important as the growth rates that we have been working so hard to increase. Is our present idea of growth then divorced from the idea of a healthy environment? The air that we breathe, we have polluted it to alarming levels that we have exposed ourselves to respiratory diseases. Our waters are a source of life. We did not only use it, but we used it up. We even dirtied it. We've been using Manila Bay, Ilog Pasig, Laguna Tibay, and other bodies of water as our sewerage sites. Moreover, we intend to extract our minerals in 30 to 50 years, even if future generations of Filipinos will have nothing left, while our forests have dwindled from almost 16 million hectares to only 6.2 million hectares and less than 1 million hectares of our primary forests. Is our image of the future an urban jungle where grass cannot grow, where economic growth is directly proportional to the number of people who suffocate from industrial fumes? Certainly, this concern is not reflected in our traditional economic yardsticks. We are also presented with a seeming disjoint between the preservation and promotion of culture and economic growth. Is a Filipino idea of economic growth divorced from its heritage? The kind of growth fostered by instruments like the GDP and GNP do not allow us to reflect on the fate of our indigenous communities. If anything, it becomes the cause of their exploitation. How many times have we heard the pleas of indigenous groups who have become helpless in preserving their communities? They who are their true environmentalists, who nurture our forests and our natural resources, which they value and cherish as the sources of their food, shelter, clothing, herbal medicine. They're driven away from their habitats, sometimes with their own naive consent, as miners and big plantation investors are taking over the land that they have lived in and nurtured for generations. These circumstances should make it evident to us that we need economic yardsticks that do not place emphasis on the blind pursuit of economic growth. Our heritage is a fundamental source of socioeconomic empowerment, especially for cultural communities that have been struggling to preserve and relive their traditions despite the pressures of modernity. But how do we preserve and sustain the traditional arts, crafts, and local industries deeply ingrained in the Filipino culture? How do we support our culture bearers so they do not give up their crafts and instead encourage them to pass on their skills to the next generation? How do we create harmonious connections between tradition and modernity? Through the cultural agencies of government, we support indigenous communities through the schools of living traditions, which teach the young generation the traditional arts, crafts, music, and the practices of the village. We are collaborating with the schools, state universities, and colleges to document indigenous knowledge and practices. The SUCs of the Cordillera, for example, have already done this and have featured their indigenous practices on agriculture and environment protection. Our indigenous peoples are the epitome of the tradition, the skill, and the creativity of the great Filipino mind, and recording this ingenuity will allow traditions to stay alive and flourish. Our National Museum is showcasing various cultural traditions through galleries such as the Hiblan ng Lahing Filipino, Baybayin Gallery of our ancient scripts, Manlilikan Bayan Exhibition, in the Bangsamoro Gallery, among many others. In the Senate, as I showed you, we filed a Senate resolution urging the NEDA to develop new indicators that will reflect the happiness and well-being of Filipinos, adopting, in a way, the concept of the Kingdom of Bhutan. So we're very honored, I hope they come soon, to have with us today Dr. Samdu Chetri. He's actually the Executive Director of the GNH Center in Bhutan. He will discuss how they have successfully incorporated the GNH in their development policies and programs. The world indeed needs to revisit and to rethink conventional frameworks and strategies for socio-economic development. We should examine our respective development approaches and ask these questions. How can we further develop our societies without compromising the welfare of generations to come? How can we advance our socio-economic standards without putting our people at greater risk? Excuse me. How can we realize our shared goals on increasing the quality of life and achieving sustainable development with greater certainty of success? Our answers to these questions will redefine for us the meaning of development. In order to effectively address today's complex problems of environmental degradation, threats to indigenous culture, and climate change, towards achieving set goals for human development, we must give gross national happiness, this new perspective, its due chance. And so, what is GNH and how do we operationalize it in our government programs and even in our budgetary process? We will learn from the Kingdom of Bhutan from no less than Dr. Chetri, who will hopefully teach us, enlighten us, give us the wisdom and the tools to be able to apply it. Of course, it's easier said than done. That for 1 million people in a utopian kind of kingdom, it's possible. But for 100 million people in an archipelago divided into 80 provinces and 42,000 barangays, it's more challenging. But if any of these provinces, even cities, could adopt it, why not? And if it could be successful even in one barangay or in one province, that could lead the way forward for others to adopt. And so we're eagerly awaiting their arrival and the lecture of Dr. Jet. Thank you.